business revolution.
Welcome, revolutionaries. My name is Mick.
And I'm Alan.
And I'm Cherry. Together we're the three business musketeers who will guide you through the evolving landscape of business and sustainability.
This podcast is made on the lands of the Boonwurrung, the Yugara and the Turrbal, and the Wadawurrung people, to whom we pay our respects and acknowledgement. And in today's episode, we're going to be diving into probably one of the most important questions of all times. How do we make an impact? I mean, really, we have all these ideas, but how do we go from our ideas to impact? That's the question.
As everyone in the business sector is facing increased pressure to reduce emissions and adopt sustainable practices, understanding where to start is crucial, and which actions can make an impact.
So today we'll explore how anyone from students to business leaders can become a policy entrepreneur and drive meaningful change on critical issues like climate change and social justice. We will uncover the secrets of navigating complex policy landscapes, influencing decision makers, and building coalitions for impact.
The thing is, here in the Business Revolution podcast, we are on a mission. We intend to prove to the world that sustainability and all this talk about doing good for planet Earth isn't just good for the planet, it's also good for business. It's good for our economy.
So whether you're a business owner, a climate advocate, or simply curious about the future of our planet, you don't want to miss this episode of the Business Revolution.
And that's why we're thrilled to have author Michael Sheldrick with us today from Global Citizens. He is out with a new book called exactly what we're talking about here today. From Ideas to Impact is the title. And the subtitle of the book is A Playbook for Influencing and Implementing Change in a Divided World.
I would often get messages from university students, from high school students, from Rotary Club members, and they would all be seeking advice on how they can launch their own campaigns to impact the biggest issues of our time, whether that's issues related to artificial intelligence, whether that's issues related to climate change. It could also be issues related to their workplace. Many of them would reach out and say, how do I lead a campaign to get my business or my workplace to be part of the sustainable future we need? And so given that, the book outlines 8 simple steps of what I call policy entrepreneurship. In the same way we have entrepreneurship in the business sense, I believe we need more people involved disrupting the policy making process, learning how to promote good policies. And so these 8 steps give people a place to start, and when we think about policy change, there's many ways to make a difference. We can contribute, we can donate, we can volunteer our time at charities, we can have conversations, and that's important because if you look at the US, only 8% of US households actually talk about climate change on average per year. We can do all these things, but rarely do we actually talk about policy change, right? Policies can seem abstract, it can seem vague, but really policy is fundamentally about people, both in terms of how policies impact, it has a very human dimension, but also in terms of how policy is made, it's about people, it's about relationships. And so my book is, my view is if you could either be a cultural icon like Taylor Swift, you could be a business executive, or you could be an ordinary citizen, but there is a role for all of us to play in bringing about policy change. And so the book doesn't profess to have all the answers, but it outlines these 8 steps of policy entrepreneurship. It outlines how you can be a visionary, how you can be a diplomat, how you can be an implementer to bring about the change we need. My view is it all starts with us. In the words of former US First Lady and the first ambassador to the UN, Eleanor Roosevelt, the way to begin is to begin. And I hope the book provides people with a start on how we can all start bringing about change. In the book, I talk about businesses as a great example of navigating gridlock at the UN. We often focus intently on these big UN climate talks, the COPs, right, that happen every year. The problem with these talks is that they all require consensus and agreement from all the countries, right? So if you don't get that, then you're delaying action for a long time. And I think at the end of the day, climate action, when you look within countries, it's really about action from businesses, from cities, from universities, right? And these institutions, these organizations, they can often act in a way that governments can't, right? They can be first movers. And so in the book, I talk about, for instance, the Race to Zero campaign, which was an initiative set up to catalyze business action. It's now got thousands of businesses, cities, and universities on board, all pledged to reduce their emissions by half, to put transition plans in place.
More than 13,500 members from Australia to Zambia, including more than 10,000 companies, more than 1,000 cities, over 50 regions, and more than 600 financial institutions are committing to their share of halving emissions by 2030. Taking action to meet the Paris Agreement, growing the world's largest net zero coalition, with new leaders pushing ambitious action, racing towards a healthier, fairer, safer world for every generation. It won't be easy, but together we can do this, if we act now. UN climate change high-level champions, racing to a better world. Join the race. Race to Zero. Learn more at climatechampions.udandfcc.int. Race to Zero.
What you've seen now as a result of this, because so many businesses are taking action, government is now waking up and being like, oh, wow, okay, we've got thousands of businesses taking action. You see this in the European Union. You see this in America. They're now putting in place their own regulations. So, for instance, now in America, right, the US government, which is probably one of the largest customers in the world, when you look at the billions it gives out in contracts each year, they're now saying you can only get a US government contract if you have a science-based emission reduction target in place. But my point is that would have never happened without the voluntary action from businesses. And by the way, I do not at all avoid the fact that many of those voluntary actions accounted to greenwashing. They didn't ladder up. But in getting all those commitments out there and having the scrutiny, businesses are now waking up and saying, well, we've got to do more than just put out these commitments. We've got to also walk the talk. And I think, you know, for businesses now, it's about implementation. It's about, yes, we've set these targets. Have we got near-term targets? Are we on pace to reduce our emissions within the next 5 years? And this is a big one for fossil fuel-based companies. Do we have a plan in place to change our business model? There's a few people like Andrew Forrest of Fortescue Metals that's talking a big game on this, so we're waiting to see what happens. But also, have we got transition plans? And finally, what I also challenge businesses on as well is don't just look at what you're doing in your own backyard, in your own operations. That, to me, is the minimum. But at the end of the day, businesses have contributed to the problem of climate change, much as governments have over the last couple of centuries. And these businesses should be looking at how they can help communities who are now facing the very real impacts of this devastating climate crisis, how they're helping those communities adjust and transition themselves, whether that's in the Amazon, whether that's in parts of Africa. And so have a look at your overall responsibility. The good news is many companies are starting to lead the way. Just earlier this week at Global Citizen, we had this incredible symposium with the Minister of Indigenous Affairs from Brazil. We had over 200 businesses. We had Coldplay's sustainability lead, all talking about what they can do. And I think, you know, we're starting to see this shift in recognition as norms change. But I think as individual employees, we can also call out our own businesses and say, well, can we go a bit further? Yes, it's great we've got a net zero 2050 plan, but where is our 5-year emission reduction target? And finally, also, how are companies using their voice? Because it's great to be putting your money where your mouth is. It's great to be reducing your emissions, but if you're in Washington, D.C. or Canberra and you're part of an industry lobby group that is preventing macro climate legislation being in place, then we've got an issue. So companies are increasingly also realizing the power of their voice. And I think, you know, you saw at the recent COP everyone spoke about the corporates there doing nefarious activities, but you actually had over 200 lobbyists there on the other side actually saying we need to shift away from fossil fuels and we need the policies in place. So that's important too.
Michael Sheldrick, who is the author of the book From Ideas to Impact. And this was an 8-minute excerpt of actually a longer interview that I did with him when he was in Australia a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about a lot of other aspects as well, sustainability and so on. If you want to hear the full interview with Michael Sheldrick, we'll make a link for it in our podcast notes on businessrevolution.earth. But let's just, for a moment, delve into what he was talking about here. Certainly, I think it's interesting. What he's saying basically is that we shouldn't be so afraid of that word policy, that we need to be better to embrace and to dig into what it means to create policy and to use policy in the work when we want to create change and have a real impact.
I agree, Mick. And I think, he really emphasizes the importance of individuals and also organizations actively engaging in policy change. And, not just through traditional means, but actually understanding, what is the policy and also influencing policy making process. And I think that's really important because I think we can often get scared off by these, these concepts of policy, and it can be a bit esoteric if you're, an average Jane or Joe trying to understand the different policies. And I was actually listening to another podcast on climate just this week, and the guest was who's a climate activist and a former lawyer, and her family was impacted by Katrina in the US, a few years back. And she talks about, it wasn't until she started digging into why did the low socioeconomic, population were badly impacted by Katrina in the US. And as she was talking to that, she discovered that the disaster process in the US is designed for the middle class. And that was just fascinating. I hadn't even thought about it, and that triggered an action for me to go, okay, I should start looking at what are our disaster processes right here in our own backyard in Australia. Are our most vulnerable people, will they survive if we have extreme weather events like fire, like floods?
It's such a powerful point, and it reminds me of one of the points that's actually in the book, and it's talking about Barbados, tiny little island in the Caribbean, and what he shares is how Mia Mottley, that's her name. I think she's the Prime Minister, or was the Prime Minister of Barbados, and how some of her powerful speeches that she's used at the United Nations, and she doesn't mince her words, very politely put, but very powerful messages, can demonstrate how we're not being consistent, and we're not holding ourselves accountable, and that's at every level. Obviously, she's talking at governments around the world. So yeah, it's a big example that can be used as you've used there, Cherry, the locals, but on a global scale as well. And it's important.
There probably isn't a more important topic than how we change our ideas to impact. Because certainly in the climate movement, I can speak as a climate activist, there are so many ideas out there. How we move from ideas to impact. I love the title of Michael Sheldrick's book, because this is really, really crucial in everything we do. When we talk about ESG, for instance, how do we move from, the director coming in or the CEO and saying, oh, I have an idea. Could we do this? Could we do that? But then to actually make it happen and see it roll out in the entire organization is another story, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Michael covers that so well in the book, because he talks about 3 key archetypes in organizations. These 3, you've got the visionary, the person like you've just mentioned, who's come in with this amazing idea. Let's do this big, hairy, audacious goal. And then you've got the diplomat, the one who's going, okay, I can see all these different feelings. How can we work with them? How can we get in bed with the ones that we don't normally want to, but we will because it makes sense? And then, of course, you've got the other people who are the actual implementers, the people who are doing it. And by calling all those out and seeing and calling out where they can actually contribute, it's quite a powerful reminder that we need the diversity as well in the organizations to make this happen.
Yeah, those implementers are key, aren't they? I think, in the video, he talks about, encouraging employees to hold their organizations accountable for some of those big, hairy, audacious climate goals. So I think, those people on the ground who are implementing or who are taking action, I think they need support as well.
And that's a great point, because there's another, it's interwoven this so beautifully. It's like, even those implementers, they're doing it, but they need the word you've used there, Cherry, support. It's massive. And quite often that gets forgotten. You've got the visionary who's going, yeah, we can do that. But then they drop away and they don't continue supporting and nurturing the other parties who are making it go. And so that's where these things can fall astray. It's what's sort of being called out by Mia, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, at the global scale. We need each other supporting each other, and it's not just a hand it over to the next person.
And not to turn religious here in any way, but it is very much about belief as well. I feel, it is whether you trust and believe the story that you are being told. I mean, fundamentally, if people have this attitude, they hear, the boss is talking about some new thing coming in here. It's called ESG. Oh yeah, ESG. It's yet another buzzword. Now they have another thing that they want to put onto us. And is it going to change anything? No. Why should it? We've seen GDPR, we've seen all these they come with these letters and then they implement something, and half a year later, nothing has happened. So unless you actually believe in that it's going to make a difference, that it will change things, then it probably won't.
Yeah, that's so pertinent. And he calls that out in different ways in there. And part of it is also a bit of a reality check. So he talks about, I think he called it Optopia, if I remember, in the book. And it reminds me of another method which has been called out recently, which is Throughtopia. What do either of these mean? They mean that mix, which in films and TVs and books or news, it's usually looking at the dystopia, the problems. Oh my God, the world's going to come to an end. Occasionally you've got like a good story. It's like, oh, it's all going to be a happy ending, and it's a utopia type story. They're rare, but they happen. But the Throughtopia or the Optopia, as Michael calls it, is more of a reality check. Let's aim for heaven, but let's think, well, okay, to keep everybody happy, we have to go somewhere in the middle, but let's at least move there, not going to hell. And being aware of that and holding ourselves accountable and remembering where we're going to is a massive part of this.
I love that, Alan. I'm curious, Alan, because I think you're the only one of us three who actually read the book. And if you were to give like an elevator pitch on what's the essence for you, what do you take away from having read the book? What would that be?
It's a great question. I think it's that systemic view. It's the fact that we have to be reminded that it is systemic. Everybody has to help each other out along that journey. And it isn't the way, it's quite a significant shift for leaders who are used to handing things over. And this mindset shift is happening around the world. There's practices like I've seen in the IT space of Agile, where you've got ongoing communication from bottom to top, amplifying that and doing it in a way that some organizations do brilliantly, celebrate the successes, accept and even celebrate failures when they've been managed well. And I think that's the key thing that he sums up with some great case studies. Yeah, another really pertinent takeaway for me was the truth, telling the truth, being open, honest, and fair with it. And he uses the example of McGowan in WA when they needed to say, well, we need to actually start closing these pits eventually, and we need to close the coal power down in a state which is, as we all know, very much driven by coal and mining. And by sharing that open truth, he talks in the book about how people actually gave him a round of applause for that, even though they were going to be hurt, because he was being honest and giving them a bit of a heads up. And I look at other examples where similar sort of mentality is being employed, like down here in Melbourne, when the Toyota plant was closed down. I went to visit it only a few months before it closed, and there were so many signs which were obviously there for a very long time, Don't forget to talk to your support for retraining. Don't forget to do this. Don't forget to look after yourself, and being open and transparent and supporting people in the transition. So it's a combination of truth and back to that support word, in all of its facets. Those are some really huge, powerful takeaways for me.
Which brings us to the G in the ESG, governance. It is about good leadership, because if you ask me, a good leader is an honest leader.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Business Revolution.
We hope you enjoyed diving deep into the world of business and sustainability with us.
And then please remember, the revolution doesn't end here. It's up to each of us and everyone to take this knowledge and inspiration that you picked up today in this episode and then turn it into action, from ideas to impact.
And whether that's implementing a sustainability practice in your own business, or advocating for change in your community, or even your organization. Maybe it's a bigger organization and you can advocate for that there. Be that visionary. Every step counts towards building a better future.
And don't forget to visit our website at businessrevolution.earth for more resources, past episodes, and ways that you can get involved.
Remember, you can find us in your phone, in your podcast player, your favorite podcast platform. Just look up The Business Revolution and then you can subscribe. You'll get a little notification when there's a new episode. You can also rate us, and please do. It's great to see, people writing reviews and getting support in that way. Your feedback really helps us in the work that we do to try to get this message further out.
So thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. Together, we can revolutionize the way that we do business and create a world that's sustainable for generations to come.
Stay tuned for insights, inspiration, and actionable steps that can help reshape the way we do business for a better tomorrow.
Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep pushing for positive change for a brighter tomorrow. This is Cherry.
This is Mick.
And Alan signing off. The Business Revolution starts with you.
When we think of the challenges we face today, they can seem overwhelming, leaving us feeling paralyzed and powerless. And yet, while we are in the danger zone, we are not yet at breaking point. How will we rise to meet the present moment? Will we make full use of all of the formidable array of tools and levers at our disposal to live a meaningful life? By the time this book comes out, my daughter will have been born. What will her generation say of us? Will they say we ran away, or will they say that we gave it a go? Only we can write the answer to that.